There are years when time moves in quiet rhythms, when archaeology inches forward with caution, uncovering the past one fragment at a time. But then there are years like 2025, when history seems to surge up from the earth, defying centuries of silence. This was not a year of isolated breakthroughs, but of revelations so widespread and profound they forced scholars to reconsider everything they thought they knew, from distant rainforests to sunken cities, from forgotten tombs to long-buried artifacts resting beneath shifting coastlines. The past did not just whisper, it roared, and what it revealed was not a collection of random finds, but a global pattern, a human story far older, more intricate, and more resilient than our accepted timelines have ever allowed. Before we dive deeper into this unprecedented wave of discoveries, take a moment to join the journey. If you're fascinated by mysteries hidden beneath the earth, lost civilizations, or long-forgotten lives re-emerging from silence, consider subscribing to the channel. Share this video if the idea of a past far stranger than we were ever taught sparks your curiosity. And in the spirit of discovery, comment below where in the world you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how these ancient stories connect us across the globe. If what you've heard so far already makes the title feel true, that we are uncovering a past we never expected, then you're in exactly the right place. It began slowly, almost quietly, with discoveries in places so far apart they seemed unrelated. Along the Turkish coast, ancient stone tools appeared on beaches where no such traces should exist. In the heart of the Amazon, beneath a green canopy, long thought untouchable by civilization, LiDAR scans revealed entire networks of cities stretching over the horizon. Off the coast of Egypt, a sphinx carved from quartzite emerged from a sunken temple where rituals to Osiris had once echoed through sacred halls. Then came the sarcophagus, a Roman woman sealed in lead and stone for nearly 2,000 years. Her life preserved with an intimacy rarely granted by time. Each discovery stunned in isolation, but when viewed together, they told a deeper story, that the history we know is a fraction of the truth. What if the world we inherited, our maps, timelines, and cultural assumptions was built not only on what we've found, but more dangerously, on what we've missed? The evidence uncovered in 2025 shattered long-standing narratives about when and where complexity first arose. Human beings were not passive wanderers scattered across the continents. They were engineers, astronomers, architects, and agriculturalists living in places long dismissed as peripheral or undeveloped. The resilience and ingenuity of ancient societies were not confined to a handful of river valleys or imperial centers. Instead, it was a global phenomenon arising in jungles, deserts, mountain steppes, and drowned valleys. New technologies opened the way. LiDAR pierced through forests once considered impenetrable, exposing the symmetry of roads, terraces, and canals beneath the trees. Underwater drones mapped drowned coastlines and cities once thought lost to myth. Ground-penetrating scanners revealed the footprints of settlements long erased by wind, fire, and erosion, where old methods failed to see past the surface. New tools peeled back time itself, and what lay beneath was breathtaking. It was not one new civilization or a single moment of innovation. It was a network of forgotten chapters hidden not by lack of significance, but by the sheer power of environmental change and catastrophic erasure. The forces that erased this past were immense. Glaciers melted and drowned entire coastlines, leaving only the highest ridges of land as island remnants. Volcanoes erupted, burying rooms and lives beneath layers of ash that hardened into silence. Forests grew over temples, suffocating stone beneath root and leaf. Even wind and sand conspired to hide memory. Time was not kind. It took not only lives but contexts, the whys and hows behind human movement, invention, and belief. What survived did so by accident, a cave sealed just right, a flood that preserved instead of destroying, or a sarcophagus locked in lead that outlasted decay. These are not exceptions. They are clues, and in 2025, the clues multiplied until the story they formed could no longer be ignored. This is not simply a question of new facts. These discoveries demand a shift in how we understand human history itself. For generations, archaeology has focused on the familiar: pyramids, palaces, monumental art. But complexity is not only measured in stone and scale. It is also found in the engineering of water in a rainforest, in fiberwork passed through generations, in trade networks that stretch across steppes and seas. These forms of intelligence and adaptation are no less advanced. They are simply less visible until now. And when brought into the light, they reveal that innovation was never the possession of a few empires. It was everywhere, arising again and again in response to the land, the climate, and the imagination of those who lived there. 2025 was not the beginning of this revelation, but it was the moment when everything converged. What emerged from the jungles of South America mirrored what rose from the seabed of the Mediterranean. The tools found in a Turkish valley aligned with the rituals preserved beneath Egyptian waters. Bronze Age cities on the steppe echoed the seasonal rhythms of migration and metallurgy. Even the silence of an Australian cave held secrets in threads still woven today by the descendants of those who once made them. These were not disconnected echoes of humanity. They were variations of the same song, sung across time and place by people who, despite their distance, shared the same instincts to adapt, build, and remember. The emotional power of these discoveries lies not just in their scale, but in their intimacy. A room in Pompeii preserved in black and gold, where meals and myths once intertwined. A shipwreck resting upright beneath the sea, its cargo untouched since the Renaissance. A young woman buried with care, her garments still gleaming with golden thread. Each is a snapshot of life interrupted, yet preserved with such clarity that they feel alive. These moments connect us to individuals, not just eras. They remind us that history is not abstract. It is personal. Someone built that canal, harvested those fields, polished that sphinx, or tied that net. Someone loved that woman enough to seal her from decay. In each case, we are not just discovering the past, we are meeting it face to face. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of 2025, that the past does not belong to textbooks or timelines. It belongs to us. Not in the sense of ownership, but in connection. Every discovery is a mirror, reflecting not only what was, but who we are. The creativity, the mistakes, the resilience, they are not ancient traits. They are human ones. And when we peel back the layers of soil, ash, or water, we are not only uncovering others, we are rediscovering ourselves. So, this is where our journey begins, not with a single culture or location, but with a question: what else have we missed? What other landscapes, long thought barren, still carry the fingerprints of lives that shaped the world? The answers await in the earth, beneath the waves, and hidden in the shadows of what we thought we knew. The discoveries of 2025 did not rewrite a single chapter. They revealed that we've only just begun to understand the book. Along the western edge of Turkey, where tourists now stroll beaches and gaze out across sapphire waves, a very different landscape once existed. In 2025, A survey team from Hacettepe and Ankara universities made a discovery that shook the foundations of early European history. Scattered across 10 sites in the Ayvalık district, archaeologists found clusters of stone tools, hand axes, cleavers, flakes resting quietly in exposed bedrock and eroded river channels. These tools were unmistakably crafted using the Levallois technique, a sophisticated method known from the Middle Paleolithic period and linked to both Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens. But it wasn't their age or craftsmanship that sparked controversy. It was their location. These tools lay on beaches, not in caves or inland camps where such artifacts are usually found. This made no sense, at least. Not until researchers reconsidered the landscape itself. Between 300,000 and 50,000 years ago, the Aegean Sea was not a sea. It was a plain, a sprawling, fertile land bridge connecting Europe and Anatolia, crisscrossed by rivers, woodlands, and migratory herds. The stone tools scattered along the present coastline were not anomalies. They were leftovers, clues from a time when humans, animals, and freshwater sources moved freely across what is now ocean. The implications were seismic. If the Aegean had been dry land, early humans could have walked from Asia into Europe without boats, without daring coastal navigation, and without waiting for the ice to recede. They simply walked across a world now lost beneath the waves. For decades, debates raged among scholars about how and when humans first entered Europe. Some theories leaned on maritime travel along the Mediterranean. Others favored overland paths through the Caucasus. But the tools of Ayvalık offered a simpler explanation. During glacial periods, when sea levels dropped by hundreds of feet, the Aegean basin emptied, revealing a vast corridor of dry land. This corridor not only allowed migration but fostered it, rich in water and game. It offered an ideal environment for Paleolithic hunters. And then, like so many other forgotten chapters of human history, it vanished. The end of the last ice age brought floods that drowned valleys, erased rivers, and turned hills into islands. What had once been a land of passage became a sea of separation. This transformation left only the highest ridges, the modern Turkish coastline and its neighboring islands, as the final visible remnants of that lost world. The tools found there are the last breadcrumbs of a massive interconnected ecosystem that supported human life for tens of thousands of years. And yet, until 2025, these sites had gone unnoticed. Because of their unlikely placement on modern beaches, they were assumed to be outliers or disturbed artifacts. Only when the pattern emerged, 10 sites, consistent tool types, consistent techniques did the picture come into focus. This wasn't random. This was a civilization's footprint, stamped across a landscape we no longer recognize. The environmental context of this discovery adds another layer of emotional and intellectual depth. Imagine a world where today's sea was yesterday's grassland, where what we now call islands were the gentle rise of hills across an open plain. Rivers wound through valleys now hundreds of feet underwater. Animals, deer, aurochs, even predators traveled predictable routes. And humans, adaptably and observant, followed. They didn't need maps. They didn't need metal tools. They simply moved with the rhythm of the land. This forgotten land bridge makes us reconsider what was possible in the Paleolithic. It shows that humans were not confined to inland caves or forced to huddle at the edges of cold continents. They ventured boldly across broad, shifting terrains that no longer exist. More strikingly, this revelation helps explain other puzzles. Archaeologists had long been baffled by the presence of ancient tools on Aegean islands like Crete or Knossos, tools far older than expected. Theories had emerged about early seafaring, even primitive boat building. But if those islands were once hills on a dry plain, then no ships were needed. People lived, hunted, and built there, only for rising seas to transform their homes into isolated land masses. This reframe does more than explain anomalies, it recasts our entire understanding of early Europe. Instead of seeing Anatolia and southern Europe as distinct and isolated, we must now view them as one continuous territory. Populations mixed, technologies spread, genes flowed in both directions. The barrier we thought existed simply wasn't there. The story echoes beyond Turkey, all across the world. Similar drowned landscapes once existed: Doggerland between Britain and Europe, Sundaland in Southeast Asia, Beringia between Siberia and Alaska. In each case, humans occupied vast regions now lost to the sea. These were not temporary shelters or seasonal camps. They were homes, domains of culture, migration, and memory. But unlike landlocked ruins or mountain caves, these sites are now deeply inaccessible, buried beneath layers of sediment and hundreds of feet of salt water. The Aegean discovery, then, is a rare and invaluable clue. It gives us a sliver of access to what most likely lies beneath. The emotional power of this revelation lies in its invisibility. There is something profoundly unsettling about standing on a beach, watching the tide roll in, and knowing that beneath those waves lies an entire chapter of human history, not erased, not destroyed, just out of reach. The Aegean tools represent the final artifacts that resisted the sea's advance, objects left on high ground, abandoned just in time for survival. They are what remains of a world swallowed not by war or fire, but by the slow and relentless change of climate. And in that loss, we are reminded that history is fragile. What we see is shaped as much by preservation as it is by truth. Yet the resilience of those ancient people remains undeniable. When the land bridge vanished, they adapted. Some moved inland, climbing into the Anatolian highlands or crossing into the Balkans. Others shifted to new routes, tracking the coastline as best they could. Their movements left echoes in tool styles, genetic lineages, and oral traditions passed through countless generations. The tools are just the beginning. The story they point to is one of adaptation, survival, and unbroken continuity. And that continuity holds lessons for today. We live in a time of rising seas and shifting environments. The world changes. It always has. But so do we. The ancient humans of the Aegean plain didn't collapse when their world flooded. They moved, rebuilt, and carried their knowledge forward. Their story is not only about what was lost, it is about what endured. As with so many of the discoveries in 2025, this one forces us to rethink assumptions. It tells us that civilization is older and more widespread than we believed, that landscapes shape history, that migration is not always dramatic, it can be steady, natural, invisible, and that sometimes the most profound truths are the ones we almost missed because we were looking in the wrong direction. For centuries, the Amazon was dismissed as a place too wild, too unforgiving, and too unchanging to have hosted complex civilizations. It was considered the final frontier of untamed nature. Its soil too poor, its rain too violent, its canopy too thick. Early European explorers described it as a green void, vast and intimidating, and their judgments shaped generations of scholars who viewed the rainforest as a space that resisted human permanence. But in 2025, LiDAR technology pulled back the curtain, and what it revealed beneath the trees was not chaos, but order, not wilderness, but architecture. In the Upano Valley of Ecuador, The forest floor lit up with patterns so precise, so deliberate, that they rewrote the story of South America. When the LiDAR scan stripped away the dense layers of vegetation, thousands of rectangular platforms emerged from the undergrowth. Their symmetry too perfect to be natural. These were not random clearings or the remains of isolated huts. They were engineered foundations, each about 40 feet wide and 10 feet tall, raised deliberately above the valley floor to avoid floods and provide structural support. At first glance, they resembled nothing more than raised patches of land. But together, they formed neighborhoods, connected by straight roads that extended for miles. These were the bones of cities, long buried under root and vine. Cities that no one knew were there. Archaeologists working the site identified more than 6,000 platforms stretching across over 100 square miles. The sheer scale of construction defied the old view that large societies could not thrive in rainforest ecosystems. Interconnected plazas, terraced farmland, water canals, and ceremonial spaces spoke of shared labor, civic planning, and complex social organization. The builders of this network were the Kilimapi and, later, the Yupano people, cultures that flourished between 500 years before the Common Era and 600 years after. That's over a millennium of continuous occupation, 1,000 years of lives built in a place once thought incapable of sustaining more than scattered tribes. The structures were only part of the story. It was the roads that truly shocked researchers. Some were up to 30 feet wide, cutting cleanly through hills and valleys, designed to connect residential zones with ceremonial centers and agricultural fields. These were not footpaths made by casual traffic. They were engineered thoroughfares, built with intention and requiring immense coordinated labor. The consistency of their width, their orientation, and their connections revealed a level of planning that rivaled ancient cities in Mesoamerica or the Andes. In fact, the only thing missing from this monumental landscape was stone. The Yupano built with earth and wood materials that rot, collapse, and vanish over time. Their invisibility wasn't due to lack of skill. It was due to the forest's hunger, a living canopy that swallows everything. Because these societies didn't build stone pyramids or fortress walls, historians once assumed they were technologically primitive. But the LiDAR scans forced a reckoning. The Amazon had hidden these cities not because they were insignificant, but because they were made of things the forest could digest. The reality is now impossible to ignore. These were urban environments, dense, organized, and resilient. Fields were irrigated with canal systems that distributed water during droughts and drained excess rainfall during floods. Crops like maize and manioc were cultivated on a massive scale. This was no accidental adaptation. It was a system, an engineered response to a complex environment. What makes the Yupano discoveries so moving is not just their scale, but their implications. They suggest that the Amazon was not a blank canvas awaiting European discovery. It was already a landscape shaped by human hands, not just inhabited but managed, maintained, cultivated. The people who lived there knew how to bend water, shape land, and coax food from a place outsiders believed was impossible to tame. They did not conquer the rainforest. They harmonized with it, and they did so for generations. Centuries before the arrival of Europeans, whose diseases, weapons, and colonial systems disrupted everything. This forces us to reimagine the Amazon not as untouched wilderness, but as a palimpsest, a layered record of human intervention, erased by time but recoverable through technology. Even the soil tells this story. Researchers have identified vast patches of terra preta, or dark earth, Across the basin, fertile soil, enriched deliberately through charcoal, bone, and compost. These are not natural formations. They are the results of long-term agricultural strategies developed to overcome the region's notoriously poor soil. The forest did not survive despite human activity, it thrived because of it. The Upano cities hint at something even larger, the possibility that the Amazon, like the Nile or the Tigris-Euphrates, was once a cradle of civilization. If these societies existed here, and if they were connected by trade and knowledge networks, then the basin was not isolated. It was part of a continent-wide web of culture, economy, and belief. And yet, because their tools were made of fiber, their homes of wood, their roads of soil, they vanished from view the moment they were abandoned. Only now are we beginning to see the full picture. Emotionally, the revelation cuts deep. For centuries, people of the Amazon, especially indigenous communities, have been told their ancestors were primitive, their cultures too fragmented to matter in the grand narrative of civilization. But the LiDAR proves otherwise. It proves that their ancestors were city builders, engineers, planners, and philosophers. It validates oral histories that spoke of great settlements and structured societies, and it turns upside down the assumption that the forest limits what humans can achieve. Complexity does not depend on stone. It depends on vision. The lessons of the Upano extend beyond archaeology. In a world facing ecological collapse, these ancient cities offer models for how humans might live in harmony with nature, instead of against it. The Upano didn't strip the forest. They coexisted with it, building in ways that respected seasonal cycles and hydrological limits. Their roads did not sever the land, they stitched it together. Their cities were not scars upon the earth, they were part of its living fabric. As we look to the future, the Upano past becomes more than just an academic curiosity. It becomes a blueprint, a challenge, a reminder that intelligence is not confined to metal, glass, or modernity. It lives in the rhythm of roads hidden by vines, in the balance of water channeled across floodplains, in the dark soil still feeding the trees. What the forest tried to conceal, LiDAR revealed. And in doing so, it gave us back a part of ourselves we didn't know we'd lost. When people think of the ancient Maya, their minds leap to stone pyramids, sprawling plazas, intricate calendars, and astronomy carved into limestone. The classic Maya period, which flourished between 250 and 900 years after the birth of Christ, is often seen as the civilization's golden age. But in 2025, a discovery in northern Guatemala shattered that assumption. Beneath the dense jungle, in a region known for pre-classic settlements like Cambriol, Los Aluelos, and Pinal, researchers uncovered the fingerprints of genius that predate the classical cities by nearly 1,000 years. The revelation: advanced hydraulic engineering, planned settlements, and ceremonial architecture existed long before anyone imagined. The early Maya, it turns out, were not learning from the world, they were already shaping it. At Cambriol, archaeologists peeled back the rainforest canopy with LiDAR and stepped into a world built with mathematical elegance. Low mounds and vegetation had once disguised it, but the scans revealed a carefully constructed urban landscape. At its heart was something astonishing: a canal system lined with stucco plaster, built with precision to channel water across the settlement. This wasn't a simple ditch dug for drainage. It was an engineered network designed to control storm runoff, filter water into reservoirs, and prevent erosion of sacred precincts. And the dating was even more shocking. The plastered canal at Cambriol was built around 800 years before the Common Era, centuries before the classic Maya cities even began to rise. The engineering behind the canal revealed an understanding of fluid dynamics that few thought possible in such an early period. Producing stucco in the ancient world required immense effort. Timber had to be cut, limestone burned at high temperatures, and mixtures applied quickly before they cooled. This was an ad hoc construction. It was a coordinated, labor-intensive process requiring deep knowledge of materials, environment, and purpose. Water was not just a necessity, it was part of the sacred landscape, woven into both function and belief. The canal system managed the extremes of tropical weather. During the 6-month rainy season, it channeled storm water away from key buildings. In the dry season, it captured and preserved fresh water in reservoirs. This infrastructure protected elite residences and ceremonial areas alike. It even maintained sanitation, preventing stagnant pools that might harbor disease. Cambriol's engineers weren't reacting to nature. They were anticipating it. They weren't simply surviving. They were thriving with foresight and collaboration. What had once been interpreted as primitive mounds now stood revealed as a deliberate and complex city plan. Cambriol was not alone. Nearby, Los Aluelos offered a different, but equally profound discovery. 2 stone sculptures representing an ancestral couple. The male and female figures were seated, rendered with symbolic gestures that suggested kinship, lineage, and spiritual authority. This was more than art. It was ideology evidence that Maya religion already revolved around ancestor veneration, dynastic legitimacy, and continuity between the living and the divine. The roots of classic Maya rulership, once thought to emerge in later eras, were already fully embedded in these early societies. Even more telling was the discovery of an E-group structure at Los Aluelos. E-groups are astronomical observatories, alignments of platforms and pyramids used to track solar events like solstices and equinoxes. By observing the rising sun across these aligned points, early Maya priests could mark the seasons, calibrate their calendars, and plan agricultural and ceremonial events. The E-group found here dated to the same early period well before the Classical Age. This proves that Maya intellectual tradition, especially in astronomy and ritual timekeeping, stretches back far deeper than previously known. It wasn't a sudden leap in understanding. It was a slow, deliberate build, generational knowledge passed, tested, refined, taken together. Cambriol, Los Aluelos, and Panal form a triad of innovation. Their causeways, shared architectural motifs, and ceremonial layouts indicate not isolated villages, but a regional network, a kind of early city-state system. These were communities coordinated in politics, religion, and resource management. Trade likely flowed between them. Ritual calendars were probably synchronized. Decisions about water, agriculture, and belief were made collectively or mirrored across sites. The Maya didn't become sophisticated overnight. They had been laying the groundwork for centuries, hidden beneath the undergrowth, waiting for the jungle's veil to be lifted. The emotional resonance of these discoveries is profound. For generations, scholars viewed pre-classic Maya society as a quiet prelude, a primitive era before the real story began. But 2025 forced a rethinking. These early cities weren't mere sketches of greatness to come. They were vibrant, functioning systems in their own right. Their citizens shaped landscapes, recorded time, worshipped ancestors, and built enduring institutions. Their technologies didn't erupt. Suddenly they matured gradually, shaped by need, faith, and deep memory. These findings also realign the global understanding of how and when complexity arises. Too often, archaeologists look for monumental stone to signal advancement, but Cambriol's brilliance was in water and plaster, not limestone and height. Sophistication lies not just in what's built, but in how it responds to environment. The Maya of the pre-classic period understood their ecological context. They managed it with precision. In an age when seasonal extremes could devastate the unprepared, these early cities not only survived, they planned. They shaped the flood, redirected erosion, and made architecture serve both sacred and practical purposes. There's also a human story here. The canal at Cambriol didn't dig itself. The plaster wasn't applied by chance. Each layer of stucco, each channel carved, each reservoir managed, represents human labor coordinated, collective, intelligent. These were not scattered laborers reacting to crisis. They were builders following plans, leaders organizing work, and citizens investing in the future of their city. The canals were arteries of survival and symbols of unity. They turned jungle into home and chaos into community. As with many of 2025's discoveries, the early Maya findings offer not only new data, but a new perspective. They force us to step outside of conventional narratives that favor stone and scale, and to instead see complexity in adaptability, foresight, and integration. Cambriol's canals are every bit as awe-inspiring as the towering pyramids of Tikal, because they reveal something often forgotten: that progress is not always loud. Sometimes it flows silently, beneath the surface, like water moving through carved stucco, guided by hands long vanished but never without purpose. Across the vast open steppe of Central Asia, where the wind moves like a river and the horizon stretches unbroken in every direction, people have long imagined a world of nomads, herders on horseback, living in tents, trailing herds across boundless grass. The steppe has been romanticized as wild, impermanent, and mobile, a place where civilization was fleeting at best. But in 2025, a discovery overturned that narrative. On a windswept promontory above the Arish River, archaeologists unearthed the remains of a city called Semiarcha, a Bronze Age settlement that should not have existed. It was not a campsite. It was a center, a crossroads of metallurgy, trade, and strategic design that challenged every assumption about life on the steppe. Semiarcha wasn't chosen by chance. The city sat high on a natural fortress shaped by erosion, split by 7 deep ravines. Its elevated position, offering a commanding view of river routes and caravan trails. From this vantage point, its inhabitants could control the flow of goods and people. They could see danger coming and opportunity arriving. This was not the behavior of pastoral wanderers. It was urban planning. And beneath the soil, the evidence of their design was unmistakable: walls, platforms, storage areas, and furnaces, all laid out with purpose. What they built, they intended to last. Pottery fragments told the first part of the story. Ceramics associated with the Alexiv-Kasagari culture, known for its settled communities, appeared throughout the site. But interspersed among them were sherds from the Chirik Rabat culture, which had its roots far to the north, in forested lands. This mixing of cultural materials suggested Semiarcha was more than a regional center. It was a convergence point. Traders from different environments, forest and steppe, met here, exchanged goods, and shared ideas. The site wasn't just where people lived. It was where cultures touched, merged, and innovated. But the true marvel of Semiarcha lay in its metallurgy. Among the rubble and refuse, archaeologists found slag, crucibles, and tools associated with bronze production. Chemical analysis revealed something extraordinary. The artisans here practiced co-smelting, a technique where copper and tin ores are heated together in a single process to produce a high-quality alloy with consistent tin content, often up to 12%. This level of precision was rare, even in more famous Bronze Age cultures. It meant that the metallurgists of Semi-Arca understood not just the materials, but the chemistry. They were not experimenting. They were refining. This kind of bronze production required specialization. It wasn't the work of shepherds tinkering by firelight. It was industrial. The presence of workshops, waste piles, and specialized tools pointed to full-time metalworkers supported by agriculturalists, herders, and traders. The bronze they produced was not hoarded. It was exported, carried downriver in exchange for furs, timber, honey, and other goods from the north. The city thrived on this movement. Trade was not a sideline. It was the bloodstream of Semi-Arca. The architecture further confirmed the city's complexity. Buildings were constructed from stone and packed earth, designed to endure. Foundations were strong. Layouts were deliberate. Excavations revealed not just homes but ceremonial spaces, communal storage areas, and possibly marketplaces. Yet, for all its scale, something was missing. There was a noticeable lack of long-term household debris, very few broken pots, discarded bones, or personal refuse. That absence sparked a theory. Semi-Arca may have been a seasonal city. During warmer months, it likely filled with artisans, traders, musicians, and pilgrims gathering for festivals, trade fairs, and ritual events. Then, as winter swept across the steppe, the population dispersed, retreating to more sheltered sites. This would explain both the city's infrastructure and its silence. Semi-Arca was urban in function, but flexible in occupation. It was a hybrid, permanent in construction, impermanent in habitation. This seasonal urbanism was not a compromise. It was a solution, a way to build a city that could breathe with the seasons. Such a model challenges traditional definitions of civilization. Historians have long drawn hard lines between settled and nomadic life, between cities and camps. But Semi-Arca shows these categories were never so rigid. Here, the steppe's mobility met the structure of urban life. People didn't have to choose between movement and permanence. They created both. The rhythms of the landscape shaped their choices, and their choices shaped something new. The city's strategic location added yet another layer of significance. The Arish River was a natural artery connecting different ecological zones: forest, steppe, and desert. Goods, ideas, and people flowed along this path. Semi-Arca controlled the crossroads. It taxed the flow, guarded it, and benefited from it. This wasn't an isolated settlement. It was a gatekeeper, a place where influence could ripple outward in all directions. Even the ceremonial structures suggested a gathering place of shared identity. If people traveled here from afar, it wasn't just for trade. It was also for meaning. The emotional impact of Semi-Arca's discovery lies in its defiance. For centuries, the steppe was considered the blank space on history's map, a place passed over by the forces that shaped cities, philosophy, and innovation. But in 2025, that illusion was pierced. Beneath the grass, a city whispered its truth. Civilization had not ignored the steppe. It had simply adapted to it in ways we had failed to recognize. Innovation wore a different face here, not stone temples or imperial scripts, but metallurgy in seasonal cities, trade in open landscapes, architecture designed for return. This discovery also reframes the role of Central Asia in the wider Bronze Age world. Too often, attention has fixated on the great river civilizations Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, ancient China. But Semioarcha proves the steppe was not a periphery. It was a link, a network of exchange that carried bronze, ideas, and culture across thousands of miles. Long before the Silk Road, the steppe was already humming with connectivity. Its people were not isolated. They were central to the movement that defined an age. And at the center of it all was fire. The furnaces of Semioarcha burned hot with vision. The artisans who tended them transformed rock into tools, weapons, and status. Their work carried value, power, and identity, and like the city they helped build, their legacy endured not in monumental walls, but in the elemental fusion of metal and purpose. Semioarcha speaks not only to archaeology, but to memory. It reminds us that civilization does not always leave towering ruins. Sometimes it leaves slag, ash, and silent materials easy to overlook, until they are studied closely. And when they are, they reveal a different kind of grandeur, one built not from dominance, but from adaptation, not from empire, but from exchange. The steppe, once thought empty, is now full of stories waiting to rise. In the modern landscape of Hungary, where ancient roads lie buried beneath bustling cities and farmland, a discovery emerged in 2025 that defied not only time but decay itself. During an excavation on the outskirts of the Roman-era city of Aquincum, once a vibrant outpost along the empire's Danube frontier, archaeologists uncovered a stone sarcophagus sealed shut for nearly 2,000 years. It was carved from limestone and lined with a thick, hammered sheet of lead, forming a chamber so airtight that neither air, insects, nor water had entered since the day it was closed. When the lid was finally lifted, what lay inside stunned the team into silence. A young woman, preserved in breathtaking detail, resting exactly as her mourners had left her 16 centuries earlier. Her skeleton was whole, unbroken and undisturbed, positioned with a serenity that spoke of ritual and respect. Gold jewelry still adorned her wrists and neck, glinting in the dim light of the excavation tent. Near her skull, a bone hairpin remained in place, suggesting that even in death, her hair had been arranged with care. 2 glass vessels stood near her head, astonishingly intact. These would have held perfumed oils, part of the burial ceremony, a ritual intended to anoint her body and guide her spirit into the afterlife. Chemical residue on the interior walls revealed traces of frankincense and myrrh, substances imported from Arabia and North Africa. She was not only buried with reverence, she was buried with luxury. But the most extraordinary element was her clothing. Against all odds, fragments of fabric had survived inside the sealed coffin, spared from decomposition by the dry, airless interior. Under a microscope, archaeologists identified threads of gold woven directly into the cloth, a rare textile known in Latin as aurifragium, once reserved for the elite. Such garments were not just fashion, they were status symbols, declarations of wealth and power. This woman had belonged to a class of privilege. In life, she had walked among the highest ranks of Roman provincial society. In death, she became its most exquisite time capsule. Her burial speaks volumes about the world she lived in. Aquincum was no remote military outpost. It was a thriving cosmopolitan city, located along the limes, or border frontier. It served as a hub for trade, administration, and cultural exchange. Soldiers, merchants, artisans, and elites from across the empire mingled in its streets. Latin inscriptions, amphitheaters, bathhouses, and temples filled its landscape. The presence of such a finely crafted sarcophagus and the precious items within it show that even on the edge of the empire, Roman life was rich, sophisticated, and deeply rooted. Inside the coffin, archaeologists found something even more puzzling: 140 bronze coins. Most Roman burials contain only a single coin, placed with the dead as a symbolic offering to Charon, the ferryman of the underworld. But this woman had been buried with a fortune by Roman standards. Perhaps her family had buried a purse alongside her. Perhaps they believed that generosity in death would secure her passage. Or perhaps this was a regional variation in funerary practice, a reflection of unique traditions in the province of Pannonia. Whatever the reason, it spoke of deep mourning and of wealth measured not only in objects, but in intention. Her body itself became a document. Isotope analysis of her teeth revealed she had grown up drinking water from a different region, likely Italy, Gaul, or the Eastern Mediterranean. She was not native to the Danube. She had traveled, whether for marriage, politics, or trade. DNA studies may one day reveal her ancestry, health, even the illnesses she endured. But beyond the science, the emotional truth is already clear. She lived, she was cherished, and she was remembered. There is something profoundly intimate about a single life so carefully preserved. Unlike the ruins of cities or the foundations of temples, this sarcophagus holds not just history but humanity. Every detail is a whisper from another time. The perfume bottles, delicate and clear, once held scent that filled the air around her. The jewelry clasped around her limbs once caught the sunlight. The fabric that touched her skin was chosen deliberately, lovingly. Someone combed her hair, arranged her posture, and closed her eyes. Someone wept before sealing the lid with final blows of a hammer. Her coffin becomes not just an archaeological site, but a moment frozen in grief and ritual. It tells us about Roman funerary customs, the blending of local traditions with imperial rites. It tells us about trade, how objects from far corners of the empire ended up buried together in a provincial tomb. And it tells us about the Roman concept of the afterlife. For all their engineering and governance, the Romans feared death as deeply as anyone. They honored their dead with care, believing that proper rites could protect the soul and preserve memory. But it also tells us something about memory itself. For 1600 years, this woman lay forgotten. Her name is gone, her voice lost, her family line perhaps extinguished. Yet through accident and intention stone, lead, and time her presence survived. She outlasted empires, wars, floods, and silence. Her story was never meant to be known, and yet, it is known now. This discovery echoes a broader theme of 2025's archaeological revelations, the extraordinary power of preservation. The lead coffin at Aquincum is a counterpart to the flooded ruins of Canopus, the ash-covered walls of Pompeii, and the shipwreck sealed beneath the Mediterranean. In each case, natural or human-made enclosures turned catastrophe into protection. What should have been erased was instead captured. And what was captured reveals not just facts, but emotion. It also forces us to question what else may lie beneath our feet, waiting for discovery. How many other stories like hers remain hidden in forgotten cemeteries, unmarked tombs, or layers of urban sprawl? Each artifact recovered from this sarcophagus, every thread, coin, and bone is a reminder that history is made not only by the powerful, but by the personal. This was not an empress or a goddess. She was a woman, likely in her 20s, who once walked the streets of a Roman town, wore gold at her wrists, and looked up at the same sky we do today. Her silence across centuries was not a void. It was a waiting place. And when the lid was opened, and light fell again upon her burial chamber, that silence became a voice, not loud, but clear, not triumphant, but unforgettable. The Roman woman of Aquincum does not change the empire's known borders or military campaigns, but she transforms our understanding of its soul. She reminds us that within every empire are lives lived quietly and beautifully, lives that deserve to be remembered. Off the northern coast of Egypt, where the Nile spills into the Mediterranean in shifting channels and deltas, there once stood a city whose name echoed with reverence and revelry, Canopus. In ancient times, it was both a sacred sanctuary and a destination of indulgence, where priests walked among temples dedicated to the god Osiris, and where festivals spilled into the streets with music, drink, and dance. It was a place of ceremony and spectacle, the sacred and the profane side by side. And then, one day, it vanished. Not slowly, not metaphorically. A powerful earthquake struck the delta. The saturated ground beneath Canopus liquefied. Buildings toppled, temples sank, and the city was gone, buried under silt, mud, and salt water for over 1,000 years. But in 2025, the sea gave it back. During an underwater survey of the submerged ruins, archaeologists discovered something remarkable: a colossal sphinx, carved from quartzite, resting silently on the seafloor. It bore the cartouche of Ramesses II, linking the site to Egypt's most iconic pharaoh. Quartzite is one of the hardest stones used in antiquity, requiring immense skill and labor to shape. The presence of such a statue was not merely ornamental. It was symbolic, an assertion of divine kingship, permanence, and connection to the golden age of Egyptian civilization. And now it lay tilted in the mud, its grandeur preserved, not despite the disaster, but because of it. Around the Sphinx, divers found objects that redefined what we knew about ritual life in ancient Egypt: bronze and silver ladles used in libations, offering tables still bearing traces of food once left for the gods. And most striking of all, Osiris beds. These were stone or gold molds shaped like the god Osiris, filled during ceremonies with sacred soil and grain. As the grain sprouted, it symbolized resurrection, echoing the annual flooding of the Nile and the rebirth of life. These artifacts weren't simply remnants. They were evidence of ritual in motion, frozen in the exact places where they were once used. Canopus wasn't just a city with temples, it was a theater of devotion. The mysteries of Osiris were among the most sacred rites in the Egyptian calendar, reenacting the death and resurrection of the god. These were not public festivals in the modern sense. They were carefully choreographed ceremonies meant to affirm cosmic order, the triumph of life over death, and the connection between kingship and divinity. Texts had long described the rituals, but until now, no physical tools had been recovered from the sacred processions. The discovery at Canopus changed that. The ladles, beds, and vessels found underwater are the tangible instruments of a drama once thought lost forever. Yet, Canopus was never only solemn. Ancient writers described it as a place of revelry, where canal boats swayed with music, where wine flowed freely, where pilgrims from across the Mediterranean came to celebrate and worship in equal measure. It was known for its pleasures as much as its piety. That dichotomy was preserved beneath the sea. The temples still held traces of ritual order, but outside their walls, The collapsed ruins suggested bustling urban life, marked by excess and joy, frozen in the instant of destruction. It was as if the entire city had paused mid-celebration, sealed by catastrophe. The earthquake that doomed Canopus created a condition archaeologists call liquefaction. When saturated soil is shaken, it can behave like a liquid. Solid ground turns to sludge. Structures once secure slide and sink. In Canopus, this event had a dual effect. It destroyed the city. Yes, but it also preserved it. The sudden collapse, combined with the sediment-rich waters of the delta, created a low-oxygen environment that prevented erosion, looting, and biological decay. Unlike inland ruins, which are scavenged by time, the underwater city remained untouched. Objects that would have disintegrated on land were protected by the very mud that buried them. The Sphinx, for example, fell during the collapse, but it was not shattered. Its polished quartzite surface remained smooth, its hieroglyphs legible. Its survival is more than a curiosity. It is a symbol, a ruler's image, meant to endure for eternity, was cast into the sea and hidden for centuries only to re-emerge in our time, bearing witness to the beliefs that shaped an empire. And it raises deeper questions. If Canopus reused a monument of Ramesses II, how many more heirloom sculptures, altars, artifacts were transported, repurposed, and rededicated by later Egyptians trying to connect themselves to a glorious past? That idea of cultural memory, of layering, recycling, and reimagining the past runs through the site. Temples were rebuilt. Older artifacts were given new life in new contexts. The city was not static. It was evolving, reflecting the dynamic nature of Egyptian identity in the late period. The underwater ruins are not a single layer of time. They are a palimpsest, a record of centuries of worship, renovation, and reinvention. This makes Canopus a rare window into everyday religious life. By studying the layout of its sanctuaries, the tools of its priests, and the materials of its ritual objects, archaeologists can begin to understand not just how Egyptians worshipped, but how belief shaped the fabric of their cities. What rooms were considered sacred? What items were buried when no longer usable? How did festivals move through space? These are questions that texts alone cannot answer. Only the physical arrangement of things left in place, untouched, can reveal the rhythm of ritual. There is also an emotional dimension to Canopus that defies data. To swim among its ruins is to enter a world caught between silence and memory. The ladles that poured libations, the beds where Osiris was reborn, the statue that once watched over prayers and sacrifices, these were not lifeless tools. They were extensions of belief. Their rediscovery connects us not just to the past, but to the people who lived in it, people who hoped, feared, and celebrated with a depth we still understand. The discovery also prompts us to reflect on loss. Canopus did not fade. It vanished in an instant. A moment of shaking earth transformed a sacred city into a myth. And yet, through that destruction, a miracle occurred. The silt became a vault. The sea became a guardian. And now, with careful hands and steady lights, divers and archaeologists are unsealing the vault, artifact by artifact, restoring voices to a place long thought drowned. In the larger tapestry of 2025's discoveries, Canopus joins a chorus of voices speaking from submerged landscapes, like the drowned land bridge of the Aegean or the lost ports of South Asia. It reminds us that history is not fixed. Coastlines shift, rivers wander, cities rise and fall. But beneath mud and water, meaning endures. And sometimes, When conditions align, that meaning resurfaces, shining with the strange, solemn light of a sphinx beneath the sea. In the cold, crushing darkness of the Mediterranean Sea, where light dies and pressure rises with every descending meter, time behaves differently. At a certain depth, where no waves stir the silt and no shipworms gnaw at wood, history can fall asleep. And in 2025, French maritime archaeologists stumbled upon one such sleeper. While conducting a deep-sea sonar survey off the southern coast of France, they identified a faint anomaly on the seabed, an outline that didn't quite match the terrain. When robotic submersibles were deployed to investigate, their lights cut through the blackness and revealed a miracle: an intact 16th-century merchant ship, resting upright, preserved as though it had only just sunk. This wreck, later named Camarade 4, was unlike anything ever discovered in French waters. It was not a shattered hull or scattered timbers. It was a full vessel, its ribs, planks, and stern structure still holding shape after 5 centuries of silence. Its masts had collapsed gently, laying across the deck like fallen trees. The rudder remained attached. Even the anchor sat where it had been secured. Nothing had disturbed it, no trawler, no diver, no salvage. The abyss had sealed it off, and in doing so, it preserved a world now long gone. Camarade 4 likely measured between 60 and 80 feet in length, a typical size for Mediterranean merchant ships of the late Renaissance. These vessels were the lifelines of commerce, carrying grain, wine, textiles, ceramics, and other goods between ports in France, Italy, Spain, and the Ottoman Empire. They followed seasonal winds and ancient trade routes, moving with the rhythm of tides and politics. But Camarade 4 had come to rest deep, far deeper than such ships were designed to travel. How did it end up so far offshore? The answer may lie in the Mistral, a ferocious northwesterly wind that howls down from the Alps. When it sweeps across the Mediterranean, it transforms calm seas into sudden chaos. A vessel caught in its path can be driven far from safety in a matter of hours. Camarade 4 may have been overwhelmed, pushed out to deep water, and capsized or scuttled during a desperate attempt to survive the storm. Whatever happened, it happened fast and no one came back to tell the tale. What makes this ship so valuable is not just its condition, but its potential. Its cargo hold remains sealed. Its interior spaces, galley, captain's quarters, crew areas have likely remained untouched since the day the sea closed around them. Within those dark chambers may lie amphoras filled with wine or oil, bundles of silk or wool, ceramic jugs from Valencia, iron tools, or even written records sealed in leather, personal belongings, pipes, knives, shoes. Coins may still be in place, scattered where they fell in the final moments of the voyage. Recovering these items will not be easy. The ship rests at a depth requiring specialized submersibles, robotic arms, and months of delicate planning. Each object must be extracted without disturbing the fragile balance of the structure. Sediment must be managed carefully to avoid clouding visibility or damaging artifacts. But the potential rewards are immense. Camarade 4 is not just a wreck. It is a time capsule, a complete, unspoiled archive of Renaissance maritime life. What sets it apart from most shipwrecks is its completeness. In shallow waters, wood decays, metal rusts, shipworms, relentless and indiscriminate, reduce hulls to lace. Looters pick through wrecks for valuables. Anchors drag, nets tear through beams. But Camarade 4 lies beyond reach. At such depth, the sea becomes a vault, cold, still, and oxygen poor. It slows time to a crawl, and within that suspended silence, a world once full of sound creaking timber, shouted orders. The slap of waves now rests in peace. Emotionally, the discovery is haunting. Ships are not just vessels. They are lives. Every journey carries not only cargo, but hopes, fears, and human stories. Who stood at the tiller when the storm hit? Who scrambled to secure the sails? Who whispered prayers in the darkness as the vessel tilted and the sea claimed its deck? Their voices are lost, but their presence lingers. Each surviving artifact is a sentence from a story interrupted. A spoon still in a drawer, a boot lying near a hatch, a game piece tucked into a sailor's pouch. These are not relics, they are memories, sealed in salt. Cameron 4 also tells us something about the world it came from. The 16th century was a time of transformation. Trade routes were expanding. Empires were colliding. Cities like Marseille, Genoa, and Barcelona pulsed with merchants speaking many tongues. Their ships bearing the products of Europe, North Africa, and the Levant. Navigation was evolving. Maps were being redrawn, and commerce shaped politics as much as warfare did. This ship belonged to that world, a wooden thread in a vast web of exchange that connected cultures, economies, and faiths. Its discovery connects intimately with other revelations from 2025. Just as the Roman woman's burial preserved the story of a single life, and the sunken city of Canopus preserved the tools of sacred ritual, Cameron 4 preserves the labor and movement of ordinary people during an extraordinary era. It reminds us that history is not built only by kings and generals. It is shaped by sailors, traders, cooks, and craftsmen, by those whose names never appear in scrolls, but whose work moved the world. There's a deeper symbolism here. 2. A ship is both a literal and metaphorical vehicle. It carries not only goods but dreams. It sails into uncertainty, chasing fortune, fleeing danger, or seeking something new. The fact that Cameron 4 now rests on the seafloor, whole and waiting, feels poetic. It is the embodiment of possibility frozen, a journey that never finished, a story paused instead of ended. And now, 5 centuries later, we have arrived not to complete its voyage, but to remember it. In studying this wreck, we do more than recover artifacts. We reach back through darkness and pressure, through silence and silt, to touch the people who once stood aboard her. We honor their journey, even if it ended in water. In the ever-growing mosaic of 2025's archaeological discoveries, Cameron 4 is a reminder that the sea, like the earth and the jungle, is a keeper of secrets, and when it chooses to reveal them, those secrets have the power to restore not just lost knowledge, but lost humanity. Beneath the crushing weight of water, a ship waited, and now, at last, we have answered its silence. In the rugged terrain of northern Australia, where rock shelters hide in the folds of ancient hills, archaeologists uncovered something in 2025 that almost never survives. Deep within a site known as Windmill Way, beneath layers of sediment, carefully preserved by time and chance, they found the most fragile of all artifacts, woven fibers, not stone tools or pottery fragments, but cords, nets, bags, and bindings, all crafted from plant material nearly 2 millennia ago. Such discoveries are exceedingly rare. Organic materials decay quickly. Moisture, insects, heat, and time reduce even the strongest fibers to dust. Yet here, In the dry, protected interior of the shelter, history held on, not through stone or fire, but through thread. What makes the Windmill Way find so remarkable is not only the age of the fibers over 1,700 years old, but the continuity they represent. Under magnification, researchers identified the same twisting and weaving techniques still practiced today by the Kuku-Yalanji people of the region. The same motions, the same knots, the same designs, passed down across more than 80 generations. The connection between past and present was not inferred. It was visible, tangible, undeniable. This was not a dead technology. It was a living tradition, stretching back through time without interruption. The fibers told stories of everyday life. Some were part of fishing nets, their mesh sized for particular species found in nearby rivers. Others were bindings used to attach stone points to wooden spears, crafted to withstand the shock of impact. There were fragments of woven bags, used to collect yams, ifri, or seeds. These weren't luxury goods or ceremonial objects. They were tools of survival, functional, refined, and endlessly adaptable. Each item revealed knowledge not only of technique, but of landscape. The makers knew which plants to harvest, how long to soak them, how to twist them for strength or flexibility. They knew how to build with what the land offered, and how to teach these skills to those who came after. In archaeology, such finds are like lightning in a bottle. They require just the right conditions: dry, stable, and undisturbed. Windmill Way provided that. The rock shelter acted as a vault, shielding the fibers from rain, light, and wind. Over time, layers of sediment covered the floor, preserving even the smallest fragments. What emerged in 2025 was not just a collection of ancient objects. It was a snapshot of a world once vibrant with life and labor, where people sat in the shade of the stone, fingers moving in rhythm, creating what they needed with what they knew. The emotional resonance of this discovery is profound. Too often, indigenous technologies have been dismissed as primitive, their histories ignored, their knowledge systems erased. But here was proof silent, beautiful, and undeniable that innovation thrived in these communities long before outsiders arrived. These fibers were not remnants of a broken culture. They were the enduring threads of a civilization that adapted, remembered, and survived. And they whispered truths that even colonization could not fully silence. Yet, the story of Windmill Way is not only one of resilience, it is also one of rupture. In the final layers of sediment, archaeologists found two foreign objects, a hooked wire and a strip of red cloth made from European textile. These items dated to the mid to late 19th century, likely carried by settlers during the Palmer River Gold Rush. Their presence marked a moment of contact, one that brought not exchange, but devastation, diseases, violence, and displacement followed. And then, suddenly, the shelter was abandoned. Bags left mid-use, nets half completed, tools dropped and never retrieved. A silence fell over Windmill Way that lasted for nearly 150 years. This moment, frozen in the debris, is heartbreaking. For nearly 2,000 years, the shelter had been a place of continuity, a classroom, a workshop, a home. And then, in a matter of months, it was gone. The disruption was not slow erosion, but sudden dislocation. Colonization didn't just destroy land, it interrupted memory. The unfinished fibers, still lying where they were being made, tell a story of lives uprooted before they could finish what their ancestors had done for generations. And yet, even here, there is hope. The techniques preserved in the cave were not lost. The Kuku Yalanji and other indigenous communities continued to practice them quietly, defiantly, often in the face of systemic suppression. Today, those techniques are alive, taught from elders to youth, shared in workshops and ceremonies, embedded in stories and songs. The discovery at Windmill Way doesn't just validate indigenous knowledge, it elevates it. It proves that these traditions are not recreations. They are continuations. There is a broader lesson here, one echoed across many of 2025's archaeological revelations. Complexity does not always wear the mask of empire. It does not require stone monuments or bronze tools. Sometimes, it is found in the twist of a cord, the shape of a net, the pattern of a bag. Technologies of survival are no less remarkable than technologies of war. They require observation, adaptation, and deep relationship with the environment. They are the technologies that allowed people to live in difficult landscapes not for decades, but for millennia. Windmill Way also challenges how we value knowledge. In Western traditions, innovation is often measured by what is new, but here, value lies in what endures. To carry a technique across 80 generations is to preserve not only a method, but a worldview, one where utility and respect for nature are inseparable, where every thread carries a lesson, and every knot remembers a teacher. For archaeologists, the survival of fibers is a rare gift, but for the descendants of those who made them, it is a recognition long overdue. It is a scientific confirmation of what oral histories have always claimed, that they belong to one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth, that their tools, their knowledge, their land, and their identity are not relics. They are roots. In the broader mosaic of human history, the fibers of Windmill Way are among the most delicate, and yet the most enduring. They remind us that strength is not always found in stone. Sometimes, it is found in thread pulled from a plant, shaped by hand, and passed from one life to another, over and over again. They are reminders that history is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, woven in silence, and left beneath the dust to wait for someone to listen. Beneath the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, a city frozen in time continues to reveal secrets nearly 2,000 years after its final breath. In 2025, archaeologists working in Reggio 9, a relatively unexplored district of Pompeii, opened a doorway into a room that defied all expectations. It wasn't the size that surprised them, but the atmosphere. The walls were painted entirely black, deep, glossy, absorbing the light. Against that darkness, mythological scenes came alive with extraordinary clarity. The effect was theatrical, intimate, and intense. This was not just another dining room. It was something else, a stage for stories, a chamber of contemplation, a canvas where myth and memory intertwined. Banquet rooms in Roman houses were usually bright, inviting, adorned with landscapes and scenes of leisure. But the Black Room, as it was quickly dubbed, was different. Here, darkness was not absence. It was design. The paintings glowed with contrast, Orpheus playing his lyre, Hercules standing before the gods, Paris offering the golden apple. These were not random decorations. They were provocations, narratives chosen to guide conversation, reflection, and identity. The room wasn't just where people ate. It was where they encountered myth as mirror, where they surrounded themselves with stories to make sense of power, fate, and desire. The technical mastery required to paint such a room was immense. Black pigments were expensive, difficult to apply evenly, and prone to fading. Covering an entire chamber in deep black demanded planning, resources, and confidence. Whoever commissioned this space wanted more than luxury. They wanted meaning, and when the oil lamps were lit during evening feasts, the light would have bounced off the white mosaic floor and reflected softly against the dark walls, making the scenes flicker and come alive. It would have felt like stepping into another world, suspended between theater and ritual, darkness and firelight. Excavators found signs that the house was undergoing renovation at the time of the eruption. Tools, scaffolding materials, and plaster pots lay scattered through adjoining rooms. The Black Room may have been part of an ongoing transformation, an attempt to elevate the household status or create a more immersive dining experience. Its completion was interrupted by disaster, but its preservation was ensured by that same catastrophe. The eruption that ended life in Pompeii also sealed this room in ash, protecting it from time's decay. Now, it speaks again, not only of Roman aesthetics, but of Roman psychology, taste, and ambition. This discovery, layered in visual drama and emotional weight, aligns with the broader theme of 2025's archaeological breakthroughs. That complexity can be found not only in systems and cities, but in spaces of intimacy. The Black Room is not monumental architecture. It is a personal environment designed for small groups, for shared meals and whispered stories. It shows that ancient people didn't just live in their world. They designed it, curated it, and sought to elevate their experience through art, mood, and myth. But as the Black Room reveals the soul of a Roman household, another discovery in 2025 revealed the soul of a dynasty, a tomb, long lost to time, belonging to a forgotten pharaoh, deep in the rugged cliffs of the western desert of Egypt, beyond the Valley of the Kings, and far from the crowded tombs of more celebrated rulers. Archaeologists found a rock-cut chamber that had remained undisturbed for more than 3,000 years, catalogued as Tome Quatre. It belonged to Thutmose II, a pharaoh whose name had faded into the background of the 18th dynasty's towering giants. His reign was short, overshadowed by his formidable wife Hatshepsut and his warrior son Thutmose III. His monuments were few, his achievements understated. For centuries, his mummy was known, recovered from a royal cache in the 19th century, but his original burial site remained elusive. Until now, the tomb lay hidden in Wadi Gabanat el Kurud, a desolate ravine chosen perhaps for secrecy, perhaps for protection. Its entrance was modest, but inside, the evidence was clear. Traces of pigment on the walls, blue, yellow, and red, spoke of the Book of Amduat, the sacred text that guided the king through the 12 hours of night and into rebirth. Stars were painted across the ceiling, serpents, gods, and celestial boats adorned the walls, even in fragmentary form. Among the artifacts were alabaster jars, bearing the cartouche of Thutmose II, the final proof of the tomb's occupant. Though looters had long ago shattered the sarcophagus and stolen treasures, the structure of the tomb endured. Its architecture reflected a transitional period in burial design when solar and underworld themes were beginning to merge, bridging the cults of Ra and Osiris. The location near the tombs of royal wives suggests familial connections still held meaning in burial decisions. Thutmose II, in death, had returned to his kin. This rediscovery does more than restore a name to the map of Egyptian kings. It restores a presence. Thutmose II was a bridge, a link between the ambition of Hatshepsut and the military brilliance of Thutmose III. His reign, though brief, stabilized power during a crucial moment. His burial reaffirms that even minor rulers were honored with care, ritual, and cosmic preparation. And his tomb, hidden for millennia, adds a missing chapter to the story of Egypt's most dynamic dynasty. The emotional resonance of this find is quiet but profound. We tend to remember history through the brightest stars, great conquerors, revolutionary queens, legendary reformers. But between them are others, no less human, no less important, simply less loud. Thutmose's Akanda reminds us that even those overshadowed by time still matter deeply in their own world. His tomb, modest but sacred, speaks of reverence, belief, and the desire to be remembered beyond death. The pairing of these two discoveries, the intimate black room of Pompeii and the solemn tomb of an Egyptian king, brings 2025's archaeological journey to its most human level. One space was meant for joy, laughter, reflection, and myth. The other for silence, ritual, and eternal passage. One was interrupted by fire from above, the other preserved by dry stone and secrecy. Yet both ask the same question: how do we remember? How do we design space, tell stories, and surround ourselves with meaning when we know time will one day wash it all away? In answering that question, we begin to understand something larger, that history is not made only of cities and wars, but of rooms and tombs, of dinners and funerals, of paint on plaster and stars on ceilings. These moments, captured and preserved, show us that ancient people, like us, craved beauty, feared loss, and hoped for continuity. Their art was not just decoration. It was declaration, a message to the future, painted or carved or buried, asking not to be forgotten. And through dust and ash, through soil and stone, we have heard them.